As I sat down and reviewed my episode statistics for the year of 2024 for the podcast, I was 0% surprised that the number 3 most listened to episode of the Secondary Science Simplified podcast this year was what to do when you care more than your students. I know so many of you have just been exhausting yourself this school year trying to get your students to care as much as you do about their success in your class. You are taking on a burden that you need them to carry for themselves, and it is just plain not sustainable for you to be doing this. So I think this is incredibly timely to replay this episode at the end of the semester as midterms are happening for many of you, as people are coming to your classroom and asking for extra credit and asking for you to curve their grades, and you're just absorbing and absorbing and absorbing more and more of this. Because I really want this episode to give you a perspective shift, but also really practical steps that you can take with you moving into a new and fresh start next semester. Because in this episode, we cover first, why this happens, then what your 2 options are moving forward, and lastly, how to move forward in a way that's going to serve your students, but is also sustainable for you, the teacher, for the rest of this school year, and hopefully the rest of the time that you choose to be in this profession, which can be a very long time if you find out how to do this job in a way that is sustainable and has work-life balance, which I'm obsessed with talking about and teaching other teachers how to have. So this episode is such a starting place for that conversation. So if you are ready to feel some relief from the burden of caring more than your students do, then this is the episode for you. Let's dive in. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I am passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You are in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. First and foremost, why does this happen? Why do we so often find that we care so much more than our students do about their success in our class and about learning? I think the better question is, why do we expect them to care as much as we do? I mean, honestly, you will care about this more than they do. Why do I know that? 1, you chose this job. They did not choose to be in your class, most likely. Okay? Most likely, they are required to be in your class legally because they have to go to school, and you probably teach classes that are required to graduate high school. And maybe you're like, well, I teach this elective course and they didn't have to sign up. Well, maybe their parent signed them up. Maybe their advisor or their school counselor said, you need another class and this one works in your schedule, and so you have to be here, okay? But I just think the majority of our students are not in our classrooms by choice. We are in our classrooms by choice, even if it may feel like you're kind of locked in there for this career forever. That's not the case. I have past episodes about this you can listen to kind of assess, do you need to stay or do you need to go? Check out 121 and 122. But I think this is an important way to switch our mindset. I think it's so depressing just to constantly think like, I care so much more than they do. Why don't they care so much as me? And instead think, why do I expect them to care as much as I do? And letting go of that expectation that their care level will match yours. Because I think also not only did you choose to be here and they didn't, but if you're choosing to be in the education field, I am venturing to guess that you by nature are a helper. You chose to be in a helping profession. Okay, there are other helping professions you could have chosen. You could have been in the medical field in any sort of capacity. That's a helping profession, okay? There's so many things. I'm not going to list them all because you're here now. And I'm telling you that teaching is a helping profession. So I know you care about helping these students. And some people, of course, naturally care more than others. I know we all get into this for different motivations. But I just don't think you end up here unless you care about students and you care about them learning. So of course you will care more. So that's why we're here. I also will say, I think the reason this is coming up in my survey results more so than in past years I've done surveys is because the disparity in care levels is so much greater now post-pandemic. I think prior to the pandemic, teachers always cared more, but it wasn't as obvious. Whereas now the level of apathy, and honestly, I would say apathy, but also atrophy, the atrophy of their learning muscles and of their caring muscles and of their attention span muscles. It's all so atrophied that it just feels like they care so much less than we do. Okay. It's just this huge disparity, but this caring more than our students, it's a tale as old as time. Now it just feels like the gap is so much greater. So that's the depressing truth of it. What are our options? Let's think about this logically. You have two options. You can either care less or you can get them to care more. That's really all we have here. Now, we don't have a lot of control over them. So it feels like the easiest option is to say you need to care less rather than keep, spinning your wheels, trying to get them to care more. But at the same time, I don't want you to just become this blob who doesn't care about students and is just going through the motions, because that's not a win for anyone either. I just don't want you to also, though, on the other extreme, have this pressure to be like, I have to motivate them to care. That is too much of a burden for you to bear. Now, I will say, I do think your enthusiasm is contagious. I think it is our responsibility in any sort of leadership role, especially in an educational leadership role, to maintain a positive attitude as best we can. I really think, especially in these apathetic times, we have to lead by example here. Students are so surrounded by negativity and negative voices all around them in the world, through their phones, through their headphones. This is what they're hearing. Really staying positive is key here. And I know this is very, very hard, but I think the best you can do to stay positive, that's one way that you can show your care for them. And that could maybe inspire a little bit more care on their part in turn, because you're staying positive and you're not just slamming this down their throats with negativity, not just talking about all they stand to lose, but also focusing on what you stand to gain if you start to care about this more. So how do we move forward, and how do we get these students to move forward, especially this time of year? I know you probably have students that may not be passing your class, and if you have seniors, that means they may not be graduating. So I realize that this is dire, but how to move forward, I'm going to give you some tips here. I'm really going to give you 3 things here that I want you to do. And these 3 things are going to hopefully help you care less, but also help you get them to care more. Because like I said at the top of this episode, we want to serve our students. Of course, that is number 1 priority. But the very closest second priority, if not tied for first, is the sustainability for you as a teacher. And so you cannot be dragging these kids across the finish line. You should not be doing that. So here's how we move forward. First, we put things in their proper place. And this is a mental thing that you need to do. You need to know in your mind that this is your job. This is not your life. I've talked about this so many times on this podcast. You cannot use your students' successes and failures as the report card for how you are and who you are as a person. You really shouldn't even use them to reflect who you are and how you are as a teacher, because there are so many things going on in their lives that are so outside of your scope and sequence and capacity and capability of impacting. Your students' successes and their failures cannot be the rubric in which you find any sort of personal value, because this is your job. It's not your entire life. Being a teacher does not define who you are as a whole human. And even still, this is your job, but your job has a ton of things that go into it besides just whether or not your students pass or fail. They say you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. That is a true statement. That is true. All that you can do is your absolute best within your current capacity in your current season of life, which is constantly varying. And then you have to shut the door on it and let it be. You are a human. You can only do so much. And at the end of the day, we are not responsible for their lives. Unless you are the legal parent or guardian of your students, you do not have this responsibility over them. Okay. So you need to give yourself grace. Now, you do everything that you need to do on your end, which we're going to talk about in a second, but then you need to let the consequences lie where they lie. You cannot do the work, take the test, or walk that graduation stage for them. They have to do it. We can set them up for success, but at the end of the day, they have to do it. And I think especially, I keep mentioning this, but I think students are extra bad at this right now. I was going to say suck. Like they suck at this right now because their resiliency muscles and their go-getter muscles, like I said at the beginning, are just atrophied. Like they just don't have that energy within them anymore. It's hard for them to muster that up. So I think you need to give yourself grace. Like you're working with extremely hard test subjects here. It would be a lot easier to work in a lab right now and be working with chemicals or even microorganisms. Those would be a lot easier test subjects than 30 to 150 high school students. So I want you to put things in their proper place. And that is take all of the emotions you're feeling about this and the shame you may be feeling and the guilt. Let's put them in an appropriate box and let's file that away and let's separate that from your identity, who you are as a person and even who you are as a teacher. Because again, this does not fully define you. You will have students that fail maybe every year of your entire career. It is not a measure of whether or not you are a good teacher. Your due diligence is, and that's what we need to do next to move forward. We put things in its proper place and we do our due diligence. There should be no surprises at the end of the year ever. A student should never be surprised to find out that they're failing or not passing or not getting an A++ extra star unicorn sticker. Their parents should never be surprised by this. Admin, school counselor, any of the major players, there should be no surprises because you're doing your due diligence here. All year long, it is your responsibility to make it clear to these students where they are. The gradebook should be updated daily. Yes, I said daily. Gradebooks are now live. They've been live since they've been digital, which is a lot of time. They should be daily updated. If you can't keep up with that responsibility, then I think you need to be grading less things. And I talk about this in a previous podcast episode that I'll link in the show notes. But that should be a live document, constantly up to date. It's so clear what grades are missing, what grades are graded. Like if you're grading less stuff, you'll be able to collect something, grade it that day, put it in the grade book, give it back the next day. I feel really, really passionate about this. It serves your students and it serves you. That's why I don't collect something unless I can grade it that quickly, because I think that's really important for them. So it needs to be so clear. We're not waiting till the third quarter. We're not waiting till fourth quarter. We're not even really waiting for any quarter report card. These are things that need to come out before the progress report. We're going to be proactive about communication. I've said this before. I used to shy away from talking to parents. I hated having those hard conversations. I always wanted to deal with things in-house with my students. That is not best practice. We need to bring in all of the major players, especially at a time like this where students are so atrophied in terms of caring and they just don't care. We need to bring in other people to help them care. We always are keeping it clear where they are. We're always providing opportunities to catch up. Now, am I expecting you to bend over your back and miss dinner time with your family to tutor a kid who hasn't turned in any assignments this year? Absolutely not. But you're saying, hey, I offer tutoring every afternoon from 3 to 3:30, Monday mornings before school, and Wednesdays at lunch. Those opportunities are available to you to catch up. I will be here all of those times, and I would love to help you catch up during those times. Maybe you can't do any afternoons, okay? But maybe your department can divvy up tutoring time. I had a school once where we had 5 biology teachers, so we each took an afternoon where we stayed an hour and a half late. And every one of us had a day. You had Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and we took anyone's students. And it was such a blessing to the students. Some of them learned better from teachers that weren't the one that they had. And so it was a way for us to serve each other and serve students and take one for the team. That's an example of a PLC that's really doing something practical to help each other and serve students, divvying up tutoring days, okay? So you're giving them those opportunities. The other thing you're doing is you're being realistic about catch-up expectations. If we're at this point in the year 3/4 in and someone has 75 zeros, there's no way we're going to get quality work for 75 assignments. So am I saying that you ignore every single one of those? No. But I am also saying maybe let's be realistic about the expectations that we have for our students if we want them to actually catch up. We make it clear. We make it clear to admin and parents, like, I'm doing them a solid and lowering the expectations of what was originally expected. But we're not just going to hide that we've taken one for the team here, but we are going to be realistic. I was talking to an older mom who I have a close relationship with, who's kind of like a step ahead of me parenting wise. So we go on walks, and she has a kid in middle school and high school. And, I got my first is just in kindergarten. So I'm still in the baby trenches. But one of her children has some serious mental health problems, and it results in him being out of school very frequently. He has a lot of absences. He has a 504, he has these accommodations, but they're just doing whatever they can as a team with the school psychologist, the parents, whatever, whether it's virtual classes, whatever it may be. How do we just get him through the best that he can do without further aggravating the issues that he has? And he has one specific teacher that will not change the amount of grades that he is expected to bring in, that is still expecting him to do, 75 assignments, even though he's only there 60% of the time of all the other students. And you may say, well, she's right and it's unfair. But I also think we need to read situations in context and be realistic about our expectations for students. Because let's be honest, is the goal for them to do all these assignments, or is the goal for them to learn the content? The goal is for them to learn the content. So what's the minimal amount of work we should be asking them to do to learn the content? That's the way we should be approaching the catch-up expectations. How short can I make this catch-up list? Not how difficult can I make it for this kid to pass the class? And again, y'all know the situations. You can read the room and figure out who's really just working the system and who is truly having a hard time, having a medical issue, having a mental health problem, and we need to support them as best we can. The next thing we need to do in terms of doing our due diligence is get parents and other adults involved. You should never be dealing with these struggling students alone. And again, by yourself, because you're caring more than them. You should not be doing this by yourself. We're talking to parents and guardians. We're talking to the school counselor, the social worker. We're potentially bringing in the school psychologist and resource teacher if there's potentially a learning disability happening here that's gone undiagnosed. Y'all, I had a girl one time who was taking chemistry for the second time, just trying to graduate high school. And they were like, can we just bring in someone else who's not her teacher to tutor her in chemistry? And I tutored her 2 times, and I was the first person to come to her teacher, her actual chemistry teacher, her admin, and her parents and say, I'm 90% sure she has dyslexia. They went on to not get her tested until she got to college and had such a hard time her freshman year of college. Her freshman year of college, she finally got an official diagnosis for dyslexia and realized, oh, this is why school has been so hard for me the last 16 years. This is why it's been hard. Okay, so we cannot let these kids slip through the cracks if there's something deeper going on here. And like I said, of course, getting the parents involved. So we're going to make it clear where students are at all times. It's never going to be a surprise if they're behind or not. We're going to provide opportunities to catch up. We're going to be realistic about those catch-up expectations. We're going to get others involved so we're not carrying and shouldering this burden on our own. We're going to remind and reinforce the consequences. We remind them of what we are asking them to do. We reinforce the consequence of what will happen if they don't do it. You will not pass this class. You will have to take summer school. You will have to do a continuing ed requirement. If it's a senior, you will not walk. You will not get your high school diploma. And then we take that deep breath and we give them space to make their own choices. I'm speaking to the high school teachers here especially. We are dealing with growing young adults. They leave our walls and they are officially legal individuals. They are 18-year-old adults that can do all of these things. Yes, they are still children. That's why we're doing our due diligence of making it clear, providing opportunities, being realistic, getting others involved, reminding, reinforcing, like we're doing all of that. But we're also then giving them space, giving them the autonomy they already have that they're very aware of in terms, we see it in how they don't care. And we're letting them make their own choices. And then we're going to document everything you've done, how you've updated your gradebook daily, all the ways you've offered tutoring, how you've been, you've maybe eliminated some of the assignments you wanted them to originally do just to try to make it more reasonable. You're tracking every time you've contacted a parent or another adult to be involved here. All the times you remind and reinforce, we're documenting everything, and then we're letting the natural consequences ensue. Either they step up and they do the work and they pass the test and they walk the graduation stage, or they do not and they experience failure. And that's where we come to how do we move forward? We accept reality. Okay, so we put things in their proper place. We do our due diligence. And then and only then, if you've done that due diligence, you can rest assured that you have done what you needed to do. And at the end of the day, you can accept reality that some students will fail. Like I said, it doesn't mean you are a failure. There are things out of your control and things out of their control. And all you can do is control what's within your control. You are called to equip them with your resources and access other resources that you have at your school available to help them. But that's all. You're not called to literally carry them across that graduation stage. That's not your responsibility. And I think sometimes we feel this pressure because we're like, I'm their last chance. And that isn't true. There is always another chance. If they are not seniors, they can always retake the course or take continuing ed or do summer school or whatever program your district has, set up for them. I will never forget, y'all, when I taught at a private school for the first time, I had a couple sections of 8th grade physical science, and I just had students that did not care. I'm not exaggerating, y'all. They had just never, ever been challenged before my class. And they were failing all year long, these 5 students. And I was doing the due diligence, y'all. I was trying to get them in for tutoring. I was telling their parents. Even their parents didn't care because they didn't believe that these kids would actually fail. I even had one student say to my face, there's no way I'll fail because my dad will come in and make sure that I didn't fail. And this is major private school student energy, as I'm sure you can tell. But we got to the end of the year. And again, I'm doing that due diligence. I'm documenting everything, whatever. And we sat down with admin and he was like, okay, these 5 students fail. What's the protocol? This school, y'all, had never had a middle schooler fail any course. And we had truly done the best that we could with them. And this was a learning opportunity. And this was a high school course they were taking in 8th grade. I don't know if if you're in a K-12 school, if you ever do that. And even I know some middle schools do this where students can take Algebra 1 or English 1 or something that's like a high school course in 8th grade. This was one of those situations. And at the time though, we didn't have a physical science course for high school because everyone had always passed in 8th grade. And so what was the consequence? The school had to make a new section of high school physical science. And those 5 students were the only pupils. And another teacher taught it so that they could learn from someone else. And you know what? Those students took it seriously. And those students never failed another class in high school because they learned that, if I actually don't do anything, I will actually fail this class and have to repeat it. There was an actual consequence. Even seniors, you might be thinking, well, I teach seniors. If they don't pass, they don't graduate. Maybe they go on and they get their GED or they do something else. Or maybe them going to summer school that summer after senior year is the first time in their life that they're really humbled and they see the reality of consequences for their actions and it changes their life. My best friend is a former coworker of mine. We worked together and she was a high school counselor when I was teaching high school science. And she said, I talked to her about this. She was like, I have so many stories in my over a decade of working with students. Some students, she said, just truly need to experience failure in order to finally understand the weight of their choices. To almost hit rock bottom, so to speak. That sounds so dramatic, but they just, especially in today's age where they're just used to being passed along. I don't know about you, but have you ever logged into someone's, a student in your school district or your school system, logged into their profile, gone back and seen their grades in middle school? I had this one freshman biology student that was one of the most apathetic students I've ever had in my life. And I couldn't get his mom to care. I couldn't get him to care. I was like, how did he even pass middle school? I went back and looked at his middle school record, and I could see that every single quarter he had failed every single class. And then at the end of the year, they had overrode every grade and given him 65s so that he could pass. But when I went in and looked at the quarter by quarter, I saw this is why he is the way he is. Because his entire life, he's realized that like, I don't actually have to pass any of these classes because they're going to pass me along through the system. And at some point, there has to be a change in the system that that's not the case. And a learning of, again, a natural consequence. You're not just out there punishing kids. And if that's what your mindset tells you, you got to get rid of that. That's a lie. You're not punishing kids. You're doing your best to set them up for success and provide all these opportunities. And only can they, rise to the occasion. There are natural consequences. Again, I tell my toddler not to touch the stove because it's hot. If he touches the stove and gets burned, that's a natural consequence of his choice. Okay, I didn't stick his hand on the burner, but if I'm not right there next to him and he runs up really fast because he's so fast and touches it, and I've told him that's a natural consequence. He never touches that burner again. And sometimes I think our students have to experience touching the burner. I'm going to be honest. I actually think it's a disservice to them if we're doing it all for them. We're conditioning them to never mature, and they're never going to learn from their actions if we don't let them learn from their actions. And so I really hope today you don't leave exasperated by this podcast. I hope you leave affirmed that this is super hard and that you are not alone in caring way more than your students do, and that this is probably the reality for the rest of your life. And I hope you walk away with really practical ways to move forward from here, of putting things in their proper place mentally, of doing your due diligence as an educator, and all those specifics we talked through, and then accepting the reality that this is going to be hard and this is something I'm going to face every year, but it is not something that can't be overcome. Thank you so much for listening to the number 3 most listened to episode of the Secondary Science Simplified podcast of 2024. You can find the show notes with all links mentioned at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 161. If you have not left a review for the podcast, it would be the greatest holiday gift to me if you would do that. So I would love to especially encourage you to do that. If you listened to this episode back when it first aired earlier this spring and have felt relieved from this burden this school year after hearing that and putting the steps into practice, I would love to hear from you. And I know other teachers who listen to this podcast would as well. So please leave a review and a 5-star rating. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.